The snarling echoed through the deserted parking garage, sending chills down my spine. I froze, my keys dangling uselessly from my trembling fingers. The fluorescent lights flickered ominously, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance with malicious intent. I knew I should run, but my legs refused to move. The growl grew louder, closer. My heart pounded in my chest, threatening to burst through my ribcage. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not in the heart of Houston. I'm Jack, and this is my story. A tale of terror that unfolded on what should have been an ordinary night in the sprawling Texas metropolis. But there's nothing ordinary about what lurks in the shadows of this city after dark. It was close to midnight when I left the office. As a junior analyst at a prestigious firm, late nights were becoming the norm. The streets were quieter than usual, the typical Houston bustle replaced by an unsettling stillness. The air felt heavy, charged with an inexplicable tension that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I hurried towards the parking garage, my footsteps echoing in the empty street. The garage loomed before me, a concrete monstrosity that suddenly seemed far more menacing than it ever had in daylight. As I stepped inside, the sounds of the city faded away, replaced by an oppressive silence. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to reverberate through the very foundations of the building. I told myself it was just my imagination, fueled by too many horror movies and too little sleep. But deep down, I knew. This was something else, something primal, something hungry. I quickened my pace, my car now in sight. Just a few more steps. The growl came again, louder this time, followed by the scraping of claws on concrete. My hands shook as I fumbled with my keys, desperately trying to hit the unlock button. The car beeped, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence. As I reached for the door handle, a massive shape hurtled out of the darkness. I caught a glimpse of gleaming yellow eyes, razor-sharp teeth, and matted fur before I threw myself into the car, slamming the door shut just as the creature crashed against it. The impact rocked the vehicle, and I scrambled to lock the doors. Through the window, I saw it clearly for the first time. It was enormous, easily 7 feet tall when standing on its hind legs. Its body was a nightmarish fusion of man and wolf, rippling with corded muscles beneath a coat of midnight black fur. But it was the eyes that truly terrified me. They weren't the eyes of a mindless beast. There was intelligence there, cruel and calculating. The werewolf, for what else could it be, circled the car, studying me. Its claws left deep gouges in the paint as it dragged them along the metal. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers numb with fear as I dialed 911. The call wouldn't go through. No signal. The creature's muzzle pulled back in what could only be described as a grin, revealing rows of yellowed fangs. It knew I was trapped. It was toying with me now, savoring my fear. I turned the key in the ignition, praying the engine would start. Nothing. I tried again, panic rising in my throat. The werewolf's grin widened. It raised a massive paw, claws glinting in the dim light, and brought it down on the hood with bone-jarring force. The alarm blared to life, its shrill wail echoing through the garage. The werewolf jerked back, momentarily startled. I seized the opportunity, turning the key once more. This time the engine roared to life. I slammed the car into reverse, tires squealing as I backed away from the monster. It recovered quickly, lunging at the vehicle. I felt the impact as it landed on the hood, its weight causing the metal to buckle. Yellow eyes peered through the windshield, filled with murderous rage. Shifting into drive, I floored the accelerator. The werewolf clung to the hood as we careened through the garage, its claws leaving deep furrows in the metal. I swerved wildly, trying to shake it off. We burst out of the garage and onto the street, the creature still holding on. The empty streets of Houston flew by in a blur as I raced through the city, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. Werewolves didn't exist. They were the stuff of movies and campfire stories, not something you encountered in a modern metropolis like Houston. But the snarling beast on my hood was undeniably real. Its hot breath fogged the windshield as it snapped and clawed at the glass, each impact sending spiderweb cracks across the surface. I knew it wouldn't hold much longer. I took a sharp turn, hoping to dislodge the creature. It slid to the side but managed to hang on, its claws leaving deep gouges in the paint. In the rearview mirror, I caught sight of its eyes, burning with an inhuman hunger that chilled me to my core. The streets of Houston had become a nightmare labyrinth. Every turn seemed to lead to another empty road, devoid of the help I so desperately needed. Where was everyone? In my panic, I had lost all sense of direction, driving aimlessly through the sprawling city. The werewolf redoubled its efforts, its massive paw smashing through the weakened windshield. Glass showered over me as I swerved, nearly losing control of the car. Cold night air rushed in, carrying with it the creature's foul, musky odor. In desperation, I aimed for a row of parked cars. At the last second, I slammed on the brakes and jerked the wheel hard. The sudden movement finally dislodged the beast. It flew off the hood, crashing into the parked vehicles with a sickening crunch of metal and a pained howl. I didn't wait to see if it would get up. I floored the accelerator once more, tires squealing as I sped away. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. I chanced to glance in the rearview mirror and immediately wished I hadn't. The werewolf was already on its feet, its yellow eyes locked on my retreating car. Then it began to run. I had never seen anything move so fast. Its powerful legs ate up the distance between us with terrifying speed. I pushed the car to its limits, the engine whining in protest as I weaved through the streets. But no matter how fast I drove, the werewolf kept pace. It was like a scene from my worst nightmares, the beast's relentless pursuit defying all logic and reason. How could something so large move so quickly? I took turn after turn, trying to lose it in the maze of Houston's streets. But it was always there, just behind me, its howls echoing off the buildings. The sound sent shivers down my spine, a primal part of my brain recognizing the call of a predator. As I raced through an intersection, a flash of red and blue caught my eye. Police cars. Relief flooded through me as I swerved towards them, honking frantically. The officers were outside their vehicles, looking confused and alarmed at my approach. I screeched to a halt beside them, words tumbling out of my mouth in a panicked jumble. "Help! There's a thing chasing me. A monster! You have to believe me!" The officers exchanged skeptical glances, clearly thinking I was either drunk or insane. But then their eyes widened, looking past me. I turned, my blood running cold at what I saw. The werewolf stood at the end of the street, its massive form silhouetted against the city lights. For a moment, everything was still. Then it let out a bone-chilling howl and charged. The officers reacted instantly, drawing their weapons and shouting orders. But their bullets seemed to have little effect on the creature. It barreled towards us, shrugging off shots that would have dropped a normal animal. In the chaos that followed, I barely had time to think. The werewolf tore through the police cars like they were made of paper, sending officers flying. I scrambled back into my damaged car, fumbling with the keys. As I peeled away from the scene, I caught a glimpse of the carnage in my rearview mirror. The werewolf stood amidst the wreckage, its muzzle stained dark with what I feared was blood. Then its eyes locked onto me once more, and the chase resumed. I drove blindly, my mind reeling from what I had just witnessed. The reality of the situation was sinking in, along with a terrifying realization. I couldn't outrun this thing forever. Sooner or later, I would run out of gas, or the werewolf would catch up. I needed a plan. As I sped through the deserted streets, my eyes darted around, searching for anything that might help. That's when I saw it, the towering form of the Houston Ship Channel Bridge looming ahead. An idea began to form, born of desperation and adrenaline. I aimed for the bridge, pushing my battered car to its limits. The werewolf was close behind, its howls growing louder as it gained on me. I could hear the scrape of its claws on the asphalt, the sound sending shivers down my spine. As I hit the incline of the bridge, I chanced to look in the rearview mirror. The werewolf was right behind me, so close I could see the saliva dripping from its jaws. Its eyes burned with murderous intent, fixed solely on me. My plan, if you could call it that, was insane, but it was the only chance I had. As I neared the apex of the bridge, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. At the last possible moment, I jerked the wheel hard, sending the car into a skid. The tires screeched in protest as I spun. the world outside becoming a dizzying blur. I felt the impact as the werewolf slammed into the side of the car, its momentum carrying it forward. Time seemed to slow as the creature sailed past me, its eyes wide with surprise. For a brief moment, our gazes locked. I saw confusion replace the hunger in its yellow eyes, followed quickly by something I never expected to see in a monster: fear. Then it was over the edge, its howl of rage turning to one of terror as it plummeted towards the dark waters of the ship channel below. I slammed on the brakes, the car coming to a shuddering halt mere inches from the guardrail. For several long moments, I sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had turned white. The only sound was my ragged breathing and the faint lapping of waves far below. Had it worked? Was it really over? Slowly, cautiously, I opened the car door and stepped out. The cool night air hit me like a slap, bringing with it the acrid smell of burnt rubber and the salty tang of the ship channel. On shaky legs, I approached the edge of the bridge and peered over. The water below was dark and choppy, disturbed by the nighttime traffic of barges and ships. Of the werewolf, there was no sign. Had it survived the fall? Could it swim? Or had the impact in the murky depths finished what I had started? As I stood there trying to process everything that had happened, the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. The night's terrors seemed to recede with the darkness, like a nightmare fading upon waking. But the claw marks on my car and the lingering fear in my heart told me it had been all too real. I made my way back to the car, my mind racing. What would I tell the police? Would anyone believe me? As I slid behind the wheel, a movement in my peripheral vision made me freeze. Slowly, I turned my head. There, on the other side of the bridge, stood a man. He was naked, his body covered in cuts and bruises. His dark hair was matted with water and what looked like blood. But it was his eyes that held me transfixed. Even from this distance, I could see they were a startling, unnatural yellow. Our gazes met across the expanse of the bridge. A slow, feral grin spread across the man's face, revealing teeth that seemed just a bit too sharp to be human. Then he turned and melted into the shadows of the awakening city. I sat there paralyzed as the implications sank in. The werewolf hadn't died. It had survived, and worse, it could take human form. It was out there, blending in with the millions of people in Houston, and it knew my face. As the sun rose over the Houston skyline, I realized with chilling certainty that my nightmare was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The drive home was a blur of paranoia and exhaustion. Every shadow seemed to hide a lurking threat, every pedestrian a potential monster in disguise. By the time I stumbled into my apartment, the sun was fully up, bathing the city in deceptively cheerful morning light. I locked the door behind me, then checked it twice more. I drew all the curtains, shutting out the world that suddenly seemed so alien and dangerous. Only then did I allow myself to collapse onto my couch, my body shaking with delayed shock and fatigue. As the adrenaline wore off, the full weight of what had happened began to sink in. Werewolves were real. One had chased me through the streets of Houston, had attacked police officers, had survived a fall that should have killed any normal creature. And now it was out there, somewhere in the city, wearing human skin. I must have dozed off at some point because I jerked awake to the sound of my phone ringing. The clock on the wall showed it was past noon. I fumbled for my phone, my heart racing as I saw it was my boss calling. "Jack? Where the hell are you? You missed the Morgan presentation." I opened my mouth to respond, but what could I say? "Sorry, I was up all night being chased by a werewolf?" I'm not feeling well," I managed to croak out. "Food poisoning, I think." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You sound awful," my boss finally said, his tone softening slightly. "Take the rest of the day off, but I need you back here tomorrow. Understood? The Johnsons are flying in, and we need all hands on deck." I mumbled my agreement and hung up, my mind reeling. How was I supposed to go back to normal life after what had happened? How could I sit in meetings and worry about presentations when there was a monster roaming the city? But as the day wore on and nothing out of the ordinary happened, a small part of me began to wonder if I had imagined it all. Maybe it had been some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Maybe I was having a mental breakdown. These thoughts were shattered when the evening news came on. The lead story was about a wild animal attack in downtown Houston. Several police officers had been injured, their cruisers destroyed. Eyewitness accounts were confused and contradictory, with some claiming to have seen a large wolf, others a bear, and still others insisting it had been a man. I watched in horror as they showed footage of the aftermath. The crushed police cars, the deep claw marks in the asphalt. It was all real. It had really happened. As night fell, I found myself unable to sleep. Every creak of the building, every distant siren had me on edge. I kept expecting to hear that bone-chilling howl again, to see yellow eyes gleaming in the darkness outside my window. When my alarm went off the next morning, I seriously considered calling in sick again, but I knew I couldn't hide in my apartment forever. Besides, a small, irrational part of me hoped that by going about my normal routine, I could somehow make everything go back to normal. The drive to work was nerve-wracking. Every pedestrian, every jogger, every person waiting at a bus stop could be the werewolf in its human form. Did it remember me as clearly as I remembered it? Was it hunting me even now? I made it to the office without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The day passed in a haze of meetings and presentations. I went through the motions, my mind elsewhere, constantly alert for any sign of danger. It was late when I finally left the office. The parking garage loomed before me, a stark reminder of where this nightmare had begun. I hesitated at the entrance, my heart pounding, but I couldn't stand there forever. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside. The garage was quiet, seemingly empty, but as I approached my car, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A low, rumbling growl, so quiet I almost thought I had imagined it. Almost. I froze, my keys clutched tightly in my hand. Slowly, I turned around. There, in the shadows between two parked cars, I saw a pair of gleaming yellow eyes. The werewolf stepped into the light, its massive form somehow even more terrifying than I remembered. But this time, it didn't immediately attack. Instead, it spoke, its voice a guttural growl that was barely recognizable as human speech. "You," it snarled, "are either very brave or very foolish to return here." I stumbled backward, my back hitting my car. This couldn't be happening. Werewolves weren't supposed to talk. They weren't supposed to exist at all. What do you want?" I managed to stammer out. The creature's muzzle pulled back in what might have been a smile, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. "What do I want? I want to know how a mere human managed to outsmart me. I want to know why you smell different." It took a step closer, its claws clicking on the concrete. I pressed myself against the car, wishing I could melt through the metal and escape. "You're not like the others," the werewolf continued. "There's something about you, something familiar." I had no idea what it was talking about. I was just a normal guy, wasn't I? But as the werewolf drew closer, I felt something stir within me, a strange heat that seemed to radiate from my core, spreading through my body. The werewolf's eyes widened. "Ah," it growled, a note of understanding in its voice. "You don't know, do you? You have no idea what you are." What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice shaking. The creature chuckled, a horrifying sound that was part growl, part laugh. "You're one of us, pup, or you will be. The change is coming for you, whether you want it or not." I shook my head frantically. "You're lying. I'm not. I can't be." But even as I denied it, I knew on some level that it was true. The strange feelings I'd been having, the way I'd somehow survived that night, it all started to make a terrible kind of sense. The werewolf took another step closer. I could feel its hot breath on my face now. "I could kill you now," it growled. "End you before you become competition. But I'm curious to see what kind of wolf you'll become." With surprising speed, it grabbed my arm. I cried out in pain as its claws dug into my flesh. "A little something to speed up the process," it snarled. "See you on the next full moon, pup." Then it was gone, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. I slid to the ground, clutching my bleeding arm. The wound burned like fire, and I could feel something spreading through my veins, something foreign and terrifying. As I sat there, the reality of my situation crashed down upon me. I wasn't just being hunted by a werewolf, I was becoming one, and I had no idea how to stop it. The next few weeks passed in a blur of fear and denial. I threw myself into my work, trying to pretend that everything was normal. But nothing was normal anymore. The wound on my arm healed with unnatural speed, leaving behind a scar in the shape of a crescent moon. I found myself growing stronger, my senses becoming sharper. Food tasted different, smells were more intense, and I could hear things from impossibly far away. I researched werewolves obsessively, scouring the internet for any information that might help me. Most of what I found was clearly fiction, but there were whispers, dark corners of the web where people shared experiences that sounded all too familiar. They spoke of the change, of the pain and the fear, but also of the power and the freedom. As the full moon approached, my symptoms intensified. My temper became shorter, my emotions more volatile. I found myself snapping at coworkers over minor issues, nearly coming to blows with a man who cut me off in traffic. This wasn't me. I had always been level-headed, calm under pressure, but now it felt like there was something wild and angry lurking just beneath my skin, waiting to be unleashed. The night of the full moon, I chained myself in my basement. I had no idea if it would be enough to hold me, but I had to try. As the moon rose, I felt the change begin. It was agony beyond anything I had ever experienced. My bones broke and reformed. My muscles tore and regrew. I screamed until my voice gave out, then howled as my vocal cords transformed. When it was over, I found myself in a new body, powerful and terrifying. The chains that had seemed so strong were nothing to my new form. I broke free easily, driven by an overwhelming urge to hunt, to run, to be free. What followed was a night of primal freedom. I ran through the streets of Houston, reveling in my new speed and strength. The city looked and smelled different through my enhanced senses. I could hear the heartbeats of the people in their homes, smell their fear and excitement. But I wasn't alone. As I raced through a park, I caught a familiar scent. The werewolf who had turned me was there, watching from the shadows. He stepped into the moonlight, his yellow eyes gleaming. "Welcome to the pack, pup," he growled. "I knew you had potential." I snarled in response, a mix of anger and confusion coursing through me. I wanted to attack him for what he'd done to me, but another part of me recognized him as pack. It was a confusing, alien feeling. "Don't fight it," he said, as if reading my thoughts. "Embrace what you are now. You're stronger, faster, better than any human. Why would you want to go back?" But I did want to go back. Despite the exhilaration of my new form, I couldn't forget who I was. Jack, analyst, human. I wouldn't let this curse erase that. I turned and ran, ignoring his calls. I ran until I found myself back at my house, the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon. As the moon set, I felt the change reverse. It was just as painful as the first transformation, but when it was over, I was human again. Naked, exhausted, but human. As I picked myself up off my front lawn, narrowly avoiding being seen by an early morning jogger, I realized that my life had irrevocably changed. I was a werewolf now, whether I liked it or not. But I was determined not to let it control me. I would find a way to manage this, to keep my humanity. But I also knew that the other werewolf, the one who had turned me, wouldn't give up so easily. He wanted me in his pack, and something told me he wouldn't take no for an answer. And so began my new life, caught between two worlds, the mundane world of office work and city life, and the hidden moonlit world of werewolves and ancient curses. Every day became a battle, not just against the wolf inside me, but against the constant fear of discovery. I threw myself into research, desperate to understand what I had become and how to control it. I scoured ancient texts, consulted with questionable experts in the occult, and even reached out to some of the people I had found online who claimed to be werewolves. Most of it was useless, but I did learn a few things. The full moon would always trigger a transformation, but with practice and iron will, it was possible to change at other times, or resist the change to a degree. Silver really was harmful to us, burning on contact. And most importantly, the bite of a werewolf didn't always turn a human. Some were immune, some died from it. I had been lucky enough to survive and turn. Work became increasingly difficult. My enhanced senses made the office a nightmare of overwhelming smells and sounds. The fluorescent lights seemed to buzz at an unbearable pitch. And worst of all, I could smell the fear on my coworkers when I lost my temper. Could hear their hearts race when I got too close. They didn't know why, but on some instinctual level, they recognized me as a predator. I started working more from home, claiming health issues. My boss was understanding, especially given my continued high performance. If anything, the wolf had made me better at my job. I could process information faster, see patterns that others missed, but it was a constant struggle to keep the wolf's instincts in check, to not solve disagreements with growls and bared teeth. The worst part was the loneliness. I couldn't risk getting close to anyone, couldn't date or make new friends. The fear of hurting someone, of losing control, was too great. And always there was the knowledge that I wasn't alone in this city, that there were others like me out there, watching and waiting. I caught glimpses of them sometimes, a flash of yellow eyes in a crowd, the sound of a howl too deep and resonant to be a normal wolf or dog, echoing through the city at night. Once I even spotted the werewolf who had turned me, walking down the street in his human form in broad daylight. He saw me too and smiled, revealing teeth that were just a little too sharp. I hurried away, my heart pounding. As the months passed, I got better at controlling the wolf. I could feel the pull of the moon, but I wasn't slave to it. I learned to channel the wolf's strength and speed without fully transforming. But the urge to run, to hunt, to join a pack, it was always there, simmering just below the surface. It all came to a head about 6 months after I was turned. I was working late at the office, taking advantage of the empty building to focus without the distraction of human scents and sounds. As I was packing up to leave, I caught a familiar scent. My head snapped up, nostrils flaring. He was here. I found him in the parking garage, leaning casually against my car. In his human form, he looked like an ordinary man. Handsome, in his late 30s perhaps, with dark hair and eyes that could almost pass for brown in the right light. But I could smell what he really was. "Hello, Jack," he said, his voice a low growl even in human form. "I think it's time we had a chat." I tensed, ready to run or fight. "I have nothing to say to you," he chuckled, the sound sending shivers down my spine. "Oh, but I have plenty to say to you. You've done well, you know. Most new wolves struggle much more with the change, but you've adapted admirably. You'd make a fine addition to my pack." "I'm not interested in joining any pack," I snapped. "I'm doing fine on my own." His eyes flashed yellow, a reminder of the beast within. "Are you hiding away, denying your true nature? That's not living, Jack. That's barely surviving." He took a step closer, and I had to fight the urge to back away. "You feel it, don't you? The loneliness, the need for pack. It's in our nature. We're not meant to be solitary creatures." I wanted to deny it, but he was right. Despite my best efforts to cling to my humanity, there was a part of me that yearned for the companionship of others like me, a part that was tired of fighting what I had become. "What do you want from me?" I asked, hating the weariness in my voice. His expression softened slightly. "I want to help you, Jack. Being a lone wolf is dangerous, especially in a city this size. There are hunters out there, humans who know about us and want us dead, and there are other packs, less friendly than mine. You need protection." I hesitated. Everything he said made sense, but I couldn't shake the feeling that joining his pack would mean losing the last shreds of my humanity. "And if I refuse?" His eyes hardened. "Then you'd better watch your back. Like I said, it's dangerous for a lone wolf out there, and if you're not with us, you're a potential threat." Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the parking garage. I stood there for a long time, my mind reeling. I had a choice to make, and I knew it wasn't just about me anymore. My actions could have consequences for every werewolf in Houston. As I drove home that night, the city seemed different. Every shadow could be hiding a hunter, every passerby a potential threat or ally. I had thought I could handle this on my own, but now I wasn't so sure. The world had become a much larger and more dangerous place, and I was caught in the middle of a conflict I barely understood. I pulled into my driveway, my decision still unmade. But one thing was clear: my nights of hiding and denying what I had become were over. For better or worse, I was part of this world now. And it was time I started acting like it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity as I tried to navigate my new reality. I threw myself into learning everything I could about werewolf society, which was far more complex than I had imagined. There weren't just scattered individuals or small packs. There was an entire hidden world, with its own rules, hierarchies, and politics. I discovered that Houston was home to several werewolf packs, each controlling different parts of the city. The werewolf who had turned me, whose name I learned was Garrett, led one of the largest and most powerful packs. They controlled much of downtown and the surrounding areas, but they weren't unopposed. There were other packs, some allied with Garrett, others his bitter enemies. And then there were the hunters, humans who knew about our existence and were dedicated to wiping us out. They were a constant threat, armed with silver weapons and an almost fanatical hatred of our kind. I tried to stay neutral, to gather information without committing to any side. But it wasn't easy. Garrett's pack kept a close eye on me, alternating between attempts to recruit me and thinly veiled threats. Other packs approached me as well, sensing an opportunity in a newly turned wolf without allegiances. One night, about a month after my confrontation with Garrett in the parking garage, I was running through Memorial Park in my wolf form. It was a new moon, the park dark and quiet. I had just taken down a deer. Hunting animals help satisfy the wolf's urges without risking human life. When I caught an unfamiliar scent, I turned, hackles raised, to see another werewolf emerging from the trees. She was smaller than me, with reddish-brown fur. Her yellow eyes studied me cautiously. "You're Jack, right?" Her voice was surprisingly gentle for a werewolf. "I'm Maya. I'm with the East Side Pack." I nodded, still wary. The East Side Pack was smaller than Garrett's, but known for being more accepting of newly turned wolves. "I'm not here to recruit you," Maya said, seeming to sense my unease. "I just wanted to warn you. The hunters are getting bolder. They took out one of ours last week." My blood ran cold. I had heard rumors of increased hunter activity, but this was the first confirmation I'd had. "Why are you telling me this?" Maya's ears flicked back, a sign of discomfort. "Because you're unaligned. You're vulnerable, and..." She hesitated. "And because we think there might be a traitor, someone feeding information to the hunters." This was worse than I had imagined. A werewolf working with hunters? Why? Power, maybe. Or they think they can save themselves by selling out the rest of us. Maya shook her head. "Just be careful, okay? Don't trust anyone too easily." With that, she turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving me alone with my troubled thoughts. The idea of a traitor among the werewolves was terrifying. It meant that nowhere was truly safe. Over the next few months, the situation in Houston grew increasingly tense. Hunter attacks became more frequent, and the packs grew more aggressive in response. The city that I had once known as home now felt like a war zone, with battle lines drawn in invisible ink across streets and neighborhoods. I did my best to stay out of it, to maintain some semblance of a normal life, but it was getting harder. My work suffered as I spent more and more time navigating werewolf politics and dodging hunter patrols. I had to cancel plans with human friends repeatedly, unable to explain why I couldn't meet them in certain parts of town or at certain times of the month. The loneliness was crushing. I missed my old life, missed being able to connect with people without fear. But I couldn't deny that there was a part of me, the wolf part, that reveled in the excitement, the danger. It wanted to run with a pack, to fight and hunt and be part of something larger than myself. Everything came to a head on a hot summer night, nearly a year after I had first been turned. I was at home trying to focus on a work report when I heard the sound of shattering glass from downstairs. The acrid scent of smoke filled my nostrils, along with another smell that made my blood run cold. Silver. Hunters. They had found me. I leapt from my chair, my body already beginning to change. By the time I reached the stairs, I was fully wolf, my clothes in tatters around me. I could hear the hunters entering the house, their heartbeats fast but steady. They had done this before. I snarled, every instinct screaming at me to attack, to defend my territory, but I knew I was outnumbered. I had to run. I burst through the window, glass shattering around me as I leapt into the night. The cool air rushed through my fur as I hit the ground running. Behind me, I could hear the shouts of the hunters and the sound of pursuit. The streets of Houston flew by in a blur as I raced through the city, my paws pounding the pavement. I weaved through alleys and side streets, trying to lose my pursuers, but they were persistent, and I could smell the silver of their weapons getting closer. Just as I was beginning to tire, I caught a familiar scent on the wind. Werewolves, a lot of them. I changed course, heading towards the source of the scent. As I rounded a corner, I saw them. Garrett's pack, facing off against another group of hunters. For a moment, everything froze. The hunters chasing me skidded to a halt as they saw the standoff. Garrett, in his massive black wolf form, locked eyes with me. In that moment, I made my decision. With a howl that echoed through the streets, I joined Garrett's pack. The battle that followed was fierce and brutal. Claws flashed in the moonlight, silver weapons glinted, and the night was filled with snarls and screams. In the chaos, I caught glimpses of other werewolves I recognized. Maya from the East Side pack, fighting alongside us despite her earlier warnings. It seemed the threat of the hunters had united the packs, at least for now. As dawn approached, the hunters finally retreated, leaving behind their wounded and dead. We had won, but at a cost. Several werewolves lay motionless on the blood-stained streets. As we licked our wounds and mourned our fallen, Garrett approached me. He was back in his human form, his eyes still glowing yellow in the fading darkness. "You fought well," he said, his voice gruff but approving. "Welcome to the pack, Jack." I nodded, too exhausted to speak. As the first rays of sunlight began to peek over the Houston skyline, I realized that my life had irrevocably changed once again. I was no longer a lone wolf, trying to cling to my humanity. I was part of something larger, for better or worse. The city was waking up around us, oblivious to the battle that had taken place in its streets. As sirens wailed in the distance, we melted away into the shadows. We had a lot of work to do, wounded to tend to, territory to defend, and a traitor to uncover. But for now, as I followed my new pack into the coming day, I felt a sense of belonging that I hadn't experienced since that fateful night in the parking garage. The future was uncertain, filled with danger and challenges. But I wasn't alone anymore. And in the world of werewolves and hunters, that made all the difference.